Hey guys, Thomas Busby here with another video trying to find out what is the best wide-angle lens available for the Fujifilm system. Now after I released my astronomical video about what is the best wide-angle lens for taking photos of the Milky Way using Fujifilm lenses, easily the most requested and commented item was how well does the Samyang 12mm lens, the f2, stack up against the rest of the Fujifilm range. Well in this video we're taking a look at how well that Samyang stacks up compared to the Fuji range as not just a wide-angle lens but also as far as an astronomical Milky Way lens. Now just like every other review, we're going to start off with what I feel is the most important factor, is how sharp is the Samyang 12mm f2 lens. Center sharpness is fantastic all the way up until about f9, but quickly crashes after that. Corner sharpness is pretty similar, once again real good until you hit that f9 range. To make a lens real wide and keep it sharp is hard to do. The wider you go, the harder it is to keep a lens sharp. And to make a lens real bright and keep it sharp is also very tricky to do. So to have a lens that is wide and bright and sharp, that's an impressive result. This is a wide, bright, sharp lens. Well done. Now when it's coming to the value, the price of this lens, it is getting very high points in that area. It is definitely a lot cheaper than a lot of the other Fujifilm options, but that's not to say it's without some other costs, which I'll talk about later on. There are some cons to this lens, but initial cost, money, dollars, outset, you're going to have to leave from your bank account. This is a great, cheap option. Now looking at features, it's a 67mm lens cap and filter size. It is not weather sealed. Now that is a big one. Now I'm going to talk later on more about the astronomical side of things, but I want to mention weather sealing now. And I bring this up in every single video because I love weather sealing. For astronomical time-lapse and for star trails, when you need to leave this lens out underneath the stars for longer and there's a higher chance of condensation, getting in there will kill this lens quicker than most other lenses and most other weather sealed lenses, and that's really important to be aware of. Another thing is this is a manual focus only lens. So for astronomical photography, once again, who cares, you're always manual focusing. But for general photography, for things that require you to, say, jump in and out and be a little bit more quicker with your actions, this is manual focus only. Now speaking of manual focus, that does also remove some features. So focus peaking will still work, but you will not get that AF distance indicator down the bottom of your screen when you flick over to manual focus. The graph will come up, but you can't see where it is focused. Also on the newer cameras where you can do that autofocus stacking in camera, that won't work as your body is not able to move that lens for focus stacking. Finally, yes, it has an aperture ring, but because it is not a Fuji lens, it does not show that aperture information through to the eyepiece, through to the screen, or through to the camera metadata. This might not sound like a biggie, as you can just look at the top of the lens there to see the aperture, but it is a bit of a pain in darker situations, especially as you saw earlier where the optimal sharpness is below f9. If you're trying to turn your aperture up a little bit, but you don't want to go over f9, because it does crash very quickly after that, having to constantly look at the top of the lens, top of the camera, in darker situations can be a bit of a pain in the butt, just because you don't get that aperture data information coming through to your camera for the eyepiece and the screen. Also when it comes to editing, if you feel like that's a really nice shot and you're wondering what your settings are, or if you want to share some photos and share the information, you can't remember what aperture you took the shot at, that information once again isn't in the camera's metadata. For those wondering about some advanced landscape focusing tips and tricks and that autofocus bracketing and stacking to get constantly sharp images the whole way through, feel free to check out a video I made about that a little while ago up here, or I'll leave a link down in the description below. Okay, when it comes to size and weight, this lens is phenomenally small and light. And say if you have the 16-80, that's a pretty common lens, that's the size difference there. It is quite a lot smaller and lighter. And giving up weather sealing and not having a focus motor around the lens really lets Samyang shrink it down a lot smaller. And it's actually an interesting balance to give up that weather sealing and focus motor to have a smaller, lighter option, especially if size and weight is an issue for you. I think that's a great kind of way to balance it for certain people. Lens flaws and astronomical performance. So first of all, like I said, things like manual focus only, who cares for astronomical work? You're always going to be manual focusing only. When you can't see the aperture information through the lens or the eyepiece, through the screen, in the eyepiece, who cares? Because it's optimal sharpness and optimal aberration performance is at f2. So you can just spin that ring right round until it hits f2 and you know you're in the best possible spot for astronomical work. And running the Samyang 12mm f2 through my astro performance test, it gets a massive score of 619, putting it into currently second place. So compared to all the other Fujifilm options, this is a fantastic option for astronomical and Milky Way photography. So aberrations for the Samyang 12mm f2 come in at 0.6%. The rest of the Fujifilm top 5 all have aberrations of about 0.4% at optimal setting, with 0.3% being perfect and 1% being, well, anything after that being bad. So as long as it's between that, it's all good to go. And so this is roughly, 33% higher aberrations than the rest of the Fujifilm range when using them each at optimal settings. When I measure aberrations, I shift the focus point in my camera up into the top right hand corner, say, and I zoom right in and really now focus perfectly on my little artificial star. However, aberrations at f2 on the 16mm lens there are great, but if you come right to the edge, right to the cusp edge of the shot with the 16mm, it's still quite bad aberrations right on the very, very edge of the shot. You can reduce those, say, by going to f2.8 and shooting at 32,000 ISO, or by just cropping in a little. With this here, while its aberrations are 30% worse than the 16, or the most of the top 5 from Fujifilm, it is pretty consistent the whole way across. So in the middle, it's not as good, but right on the very, very cusp edge of the shot, it is better than the 16mm 1.4. But like I said, changing the aperture a little bit more on the 16mm or just cropping in can balance that out a bit. But still, phenomenal astronomical performance. If you'd like to download or screenshot this cheat sheet for the best settings for using the Samyang lens, feel free to check out my Instagram page or jump over to my website. Once again, another link down in the description below, and feel free to download, screenshot, share, whatever you need to do if you'd like a cheat sheet on your phone for best settings when using this lens. So lens flaws. Because this is not a Fujifilm lens, Fujifilm correct a large majority of lens flaws straight in camera. So as far as vignetting goes, as far as distortion, they fix all of it, even in the raw files, without you having to do anything, and they do a fantastic job of it. And as far as like the vignetting around the edge of this goes and the distortion, both of those are noticeable and a little bit bad. Distortion for star trails can be a little bit odd, as you can get some ovals to your star trails rather than perfect circles, so you've got to be aware of that. But once again, that can be removed in editing, kind of to a point. The more you have to change a shot, the more of a reduction you get in quality later on in editing. When it comes to that vignetting, personally I don't care. I normally add a bit of vignetting to my shots later on anyway. But once again, if you're trying to do panoramas and things, it can be a little bit frustrating. And once again, a more change is a more reduction in quality. So there are those flaws which none of the other Fujifilm lenses really have. If they did, it was a very, very small amount and really not worth mentioning or comparing. Fujifilm nailed the lens quality. With a Samyang on a Fujifilm system, there's definitely noticeable distortion and vignetting. When it comes to video performance, manual focus only is an interesting one. Not having that choice to be able to go to AF is interesting, as I personally find, especially with a lot of newer the f2 and 2.8 lenses from Fujifilm, the AF performance is fantastic. So not having that choice, well, it's a personal choice. Because it's so wide though, you can easily set this, say, to f9 at 12mm, and kind of like a GoPro, at f9 at 12mm, everything is pretty sharp. You can really just run and gun, kind of like an action camera, and get quite a lot in shot. However, because there's no autofocus motor, there is also no sound out of it, but AF performance, is it worth giving up? I'll leave that up to you. My final thought. So normally near the end of these videos, I like to put in every single bit of measurable data I can into the BeFree algorithm to work out a score for how good and comparable these lenses are compared to other lenses. And when I did that with the Samyang 12mm f2, it came out very, very high. It wasn't top, but it was definitely well up there. But I've never really had to measure vignetting, distortion, and manual focus only. It's a little bit subjective, and to give a value to that compared to all the other Fujifilm range, like I said, I felt that it was very, very subjective, and I wasn't sure how to factor that into my BeFree algorithm. So instead of giving it a score, I'm just going to leave you with some of these facts and thoughts. This lens's image quality for price is fantastic. It has some flaws, most of those can be removed in editing, but it is still an editing change. When it comes to astronomical photography, this lens is fantastic. It really is outstanding. I personally would much rather invest money in a weather sealed option for star trails and for astronomical time-lapse. Just that condensation where I live in the world is a very real factor and will kill lenses quite quickly. However, for just Milky Way photography, for those single shorter shots kind of thing, it is phenomenal. It is a great lens. So if you use this lens at optimal settings and you compare it to all the other Fujifilm range, once again used at optimal settings, its sharpness sits like this. The Samyang 12mm f2 is sharper than the 18-135, the XC 16-50, the 16mm f2.8, the 18-55, the 10-24, and the 8-16, which is pretty impressive. It is equally as sharp as the 14mm f2.8. the XC 15 to 45 at 15mm, the 16 to 80 at 16mm, and the 16 to 55 once again at 16mm. Though it is nowhere near as sharp as the 16mm 1.4, though you're going to have to wait a little bit longer for that review, sorry. As always guys, if you have any questions, please let me know down in the comments below. I would love to hear from you. If you could like, share, and please subscribe, it would mean the world to me and help me get one step closer to doing this full time for a living. But otherwise, until next time, I'll catch you next time.